Hey, change agents, it's Laura Williams here for this week's episode of Hack the Class Video Podcast. I'm mixing it up a bit this week. As some of you may know, my big thing is authentic learning. How can we learn from experts to really enhance what's going on in the classroom? And so I'm going to do just that today. I've reached out to John Cutler. He is a huge voice in that community, and I have found myself reading lots of his newsletters. Any of the topics I really do feel relate to education, whether he meant to or not, because I think a lot of the organizational challenges apply to both industry and education. And when you think about changing education or trying to improve it or trying to hack the class to do better by our kids, to meet more kids' needs, to essentially produce successful contributors beyond just our classrooms, you really have to get innovative. And I think if we can sort of cross that bridge from education and industry, we might learn a thing or two. So that's the really cool part about this episode is I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. Like I said, he writes a really popular newsletter. It is called The Beautiful Mess. And so The Beautiful Mess, it has 47,000 subscribers. I think I have like maybe 100 on mine. No, I'm growing and learning, but like this person has been doing this for quite some time and has extensive knowledge on workflows and people and processes. And so I hope that in this episode, we may glean from his experience, maybe even spark an idea to, improvement within our classrooms, within our school structures. So yeah, I can't wait for him to join. John Cutler here in a moment.
Discover the future of education in this captivating docuseries that takes you inside modern classrooms. From innovative teaching methods to cutting-edge technologies, witness the transformative power of student-centered learning and the incredible impact it has on shaping the minds of tomorrow. Here is your host, Laura Williams.
Hello.
Hey there, how's it going?
Hi, John. Thank you for agreeing to be on here. You're probably like, why is this education lady reaching out to me?
No, I love it. Oh, this is great. I'm excited because I headed up an education role at Amplitude while I was there. So I'm not like an education person, but I'm education curious. Like put it that way.
Teaching and learning for anybody. Tell us, okay, so who are you and what do you do? And maybe just kind of touch upon your Substack just because it's so awesome.
Okay, I'll give a bit of background about myself. I actually got my start playing music. Got my start meaning I left college, or I dropped out of school, play music, and I had this video game startup. And so at that time, I was really, impatient. So I got going with video games and music and different things. And it probably wasn't until later, actually, that I slipped into sort of more traditional roles in tech. And then I started writing, which you've seen in the Substack. So I've kind of been writing for about 10 odd years now. Maybe there's definitely 100. There might even be 1,000 of these posts sitting out there. I've had like 3 different blog things or newsletters. So that's been fun. But yeah, my background's in product management and UX research with that prior life of doing music and other stuff. And yeah, most recently, the last couple of years have been really fun, although not fun from a pandemic standpoint, obviously, especially for teachers. I worked at a company that also put me in touch with lots of other companies. So I was a product evangelist for a company. And that was sort of a dream job as a real nerd of this stuff because I was able to see how lots of different companies work. And we can get into that later because I think it's sort of an important topic. There's not just one way to solve these types of problems, but that gave me this big perspective. And I've been probably spending the last couple of years just writing about that perspective. So yeah, hopefully that intro helps. Yeah, product management, UX research, some music and stuff thrown in. And I live in Santa Barbara, California.
I'm from Iowa. So I'm in Iowa right now, and I wish I was in California, but at least in the wintertime anyway, because our weather not ideal for me anyway. Sunshine all the way. So the music thing, that for whatever reason that doesn't surprise me because I feel like you're so creative and you see connections in a different kind of way, like in your writing. And as you were discussing, like you had this role where you got to see lots of ways things are done, and it's almost like your playground and like your mind and like start connecting dots. And like, I don't know, for the listeners, the Substack that John writes for is called The Beautiful Mess. And it just makes me like think like really visually of like organizations and structures and people and like delivery and like, each component of that. And so, and just for a little history, like I found John's stuff on, I think it was Twitter. Well, it was Twitter at the time. And you posted something, it was the 54 sources of dissonance. And
Oh yeah, that one. I was just looking at that last week. I forgot that I had done that. And then someone reminded me and I was like, oh geez, you did
oh,
that.
we love it. Like at the time we found it, a colleague of well, a friend colleague of mine, we were designing a course, and we facilitate, so just so you know a little bit more, like we
Yeah.
facilitate courses for educators, leaders, and we really started drinking the agile Kool-Aid probably around 2017, like just seeing it kind of like weave its way into education. And so
Yeah.
I was like, yes, like this is the way to articulate all the things I've been trying to say. Like, as a science teacher who was doing like projects in the classroom, like it was just chaos, and like it really didn't go the way I wanted it to, and I didn't feel they, like learned what they needed to learn. And so, you learn about like agile, and like at the time, like the Scrum framework. I was like, oh, we could totally like modify this for the classroom. And so, um,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a
yeah,
lot of stuff. It is interesting. I have a 6-year-old and we had our back to school night last night. And I swear, if I could get companies to even pay even 10% of the energy that these teachers were paying to just create a really engaging space for kids, the world would be like a lot better.
I know.
um so it was just yeah, we'll probably get into that, but it was just very interesting, the environment that they had created. And I mean, I guess it is part of the philosophy of things. It is a Montessori school, and it's just that they have 3 stages of kids, like third graders to first graders. And then
Right.
I found out last night, my son didn't, of course, tell me about this, but he has a mentor. And then he has these little jobs, and there's these Kanban boards all over the class about at the front of the class, they have past, present, and future, and they move the things. And there's actually a kid whose job is they have a morning meeting where they discuss the board and like what's
Time
in the
out.
past.
Wait, time out. So first grade, this like first graders are doing this?
First graders to third
Oh,
graders. Yeah.
so awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
and anyway, so it was, I think one thing that's fascinating about the education overlap with my world is there is probably way more to learn. Well, that's a judgment. I mean, there's things to learn back and forth, but I mean, educators talk about having to deal in sort of difficult situations and have a set of standards that they need to somewhat, conform to, but then also just being right where it happens, having to deal like with the situations at hand. It's so anyway, I'm just thinking it's funny that we should probably do this podcast in reverse, because there's probably a ton that the corporate world needs to
Next week we'll
understand
have
about this type of
education
stuff.
on, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Actually, I was thinking like how cool it would be to like pick your brain on some frameworks of like what's happening in like schools today, and how we might be able to troubleshoot, or like, recommendations or things to consider, if you're trying to roll like initiative rollouts. Because
Yeah,
there are just so many challenges that we see in education, especially when you're trying to do something different or new, and you're trying to inform like the whole like body of people, and like the ripple effect. And
yeah,
uh yeah, so yeah, no, we totally definitely should do that. And I can't emphasize enough to the listeners like just how cool the your writing is, because I almost like can visualize like the things you're saying that are happening in corporate. But then whether you meant to or not, like a lot of the things I really think do apply in education, because it's people work. Like,
yeah.
and I don't know if you've seen that like Dilbert comic, but I always say like people are buggy. Like like
Well,
we're
and I think there's
human.
people who appreciate is not really the word. I think I've sort of softened a little bit my stance on in the last couple months or years, but you know, when faced with an almost seemingly intractable complexity of everything that's going on, we have to sort of make a choice at that point. We can be completely paralyzed by that. And a lot of people, I'd say like systems thinkers or people who are sort of thoughtful and insightful, or maybe empaths or picking things up. There's a reflective is one word. I think reflexive. Sorry, that's probably one word for it. Or people who think about theory of mind or theory of these things. So imagine a teacher who's there and who's picking up on all this and knows that technically they should adapt their style, and technically cause and effect is kind of very loose. And I was watching the teacher last night, that needing to basically make the call to stay out of it,
Yeah.
because in 3 months it's going to work itself out. And so what you find is that, so when faced with this almost, I called it intractable, but let's just say overwhelming complexity. Imagine if you look at it, you sort of have a choice. One is to just imagine it doesn't exist and be very we just need to do this. We just need to get this thing. We just need to I call that the justing, right?
Okay.
Now, the other situation is to just get drowning in the complexity. So that's the budding. There's justing and budding. So budding is like, but what if we do this? But what if the class does this? And, but what if the school board says this? And but what if, and the problem with the budding is that you never get anything done.
Yeah.
Right. And what I've come to see is I think that there's a third, which is what I called like the canning. There's the justing and the budding and the canning. And the canning is like, well, we can do this. Like, it's not hiding all that complexity underneath the rug and pretend. We've all experienced those people in work. You come into this situation and someone who's not really involved in the situation rolls in and say, well, you just need to do this. Like, you just need to contact the school board and have them rewrite the
Yeah.
requirements, right? And
Right.
you're like, I don't know, when was the last time? Or you just need to lead better. You just need to lean in more. You just need to be a better teacher. You just need to do this. When someone says that kind of stuff to us, we naturally, if you're any kind of systems thinker, sort of like, it's not that simple. It's just not that simple. It's just not that simple that you need to do it. So I think that there is this, the third way, which I said is without throwing all the complexity under the rug, you have to hold some things constant and make some forward progress in the situation. You need to hold some, you need to create a time box. That's what time box is in this world. I'm in this product world. The reason why we maybe divide things up into 2-week or 1-week things is to create a forcing function that allows us to hold the complexity constant to at least make some progress for a week and then figure out what direction that we're going to do these things. Or, the other examples of enabling constraints or forcing functions, getting out there and actually testing the thing and seeing if it has the impact that we thought that it would have. And doing that earlier than we would normally do it is a form of forcing function. It's a can. We can go and test this with someone
right now,
earlier to do
see
it.
what happens.
Yeah. And so the example I would give with the education stuff is I was involved in education role. I actually headed up an education role at Amplitude while I was there. And I met like people who are very skilled in education stuff, but not really all that skilled in iterative approaches.
Right.
So they would say, well, we're going to design the university. We're going to figure out the curriculum. We're going to have all these goals and learning goals and things. And they did all this incredible work. They had this huge grid and we're going to create it now. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Do we even know if people are even motivated to do any of this? Well, they are, because they want to get certifications. Do we even know that these types of adult learners in this particular type of thing care about certifications?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because look at this other company. People are putting all the certifications on their LinkedIn. Is that our persona?
Yeah.
Like, is that our learner? It sounds like we're trying to do these really independent product managers, and you're pointing at an analyst who's been doing this for 20 years. Maybe they like to put. So I was being a pain in the butt, basically. But
I like that about you, by the way.
Yeah, but I think that that's a big part of this is when faced with almost intractable complexity, we could get lost in it or we could oversimplify it. But there is a third way, which is just making progress in these situations and being thoughtful about what we're seeing and observing. And I think that that applies in education. It applies anytime you're dealing with this sort of mess of things. I think one of the dangers is believing that even you see the mess. There's a lot of very interesting writing recently, which shows that a lot of people think of systems thinking is of them looking at all the parts and mapping them all together and trying to untangle this level of complexity. And then you realize, oh crap, my version of that is just one of another 50 versions in the room.
Right.
It's even way more complex than I thought it was.
Yeah. And
there's perception.
Yes.
Yeah. You'll say like, well, it seems like the incentives are out of whack here. That's why the system is broken. And then you realize like,
it's a culture
those
problem.
incentives. It's just a culture problem.
It's just
right?
a culture problem.
You start to realize.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, sorry, I was like riffing on your question. I'm happy to go into other things.
Oh, this is so good.
To mind
no, the way you're painting it, like the complexities. I mean, you could zoom in and zoom out of a classroom, like from the teacher's eye, right? Like you said, like just thinking about the decisions they have to make, like, no wonder teachers are so tired by the end of the day, especially the first week of school. They're just like, oh, I need to just turn off for a few hours here before I have to go back.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the constant decision making that they're making in their head as they're navigating, X number of students in the room. I think
Yeah.
I think you paint a picture of that. And I really like that. The canning and the budding and the justing. Like
And the Justin.
I can see these like playing out in education as people are trying to do things. And
Yeah.
in ways I do think like you said, it's that people have different views and like coming together and like trying to hash out like a common view
Yeah.
to work towards. And
Well, justing or and that's the difference between alignment and coherence. It's a very important concept for people to understand. Like alignment is everyone uses the same words. Like we agree what education means. We agree what a motivated learner is. And once you sort of, it's like I remember the day or two that I sort of changed my perspective on. It's like, no, we spend far too much effort trying to align, but often when we pretend we align, it doesn't create any type of coherent
right.
thing. And by coherence, what I mean is like there are very organized and watered gardens, for example, that aren't really growing all that well. And then occasionally you walk into someone's backyard and it looks like a mess, but everything is growing. You know what I mean? Everything is thriving in that environment, even though people have different needs. And so I think that I know that the learning style stuff has been sort of debunked, in that sense. But I still think educators know something is there. Maybe learning styles wasn't the right word for it because I think
Yeah,
that,
the science
yeah.
behind
So I think
it.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, well, but I also think there's a lot of things I've noticed in education and in product that the people doing it glom onto a theory because it does explain the reality that they're seeing, but the theory isn't quite right or makes some assumptions that it does. So maybe the problem with the learning styles thing is people found out that it's actually very situationally dependent. Maybe they learned that people can switch learning styles. Maybe they found that the learning styles are much more moldable. It's like words like agency or grit. All these are like interesting ideas, but it seems like both in a corporate setting or an educational setting, they're a lot more complex than it is. Like agency is as situationally and environmentally um, modulated as it is like your individual traits. Yet if you have a teacher imagining that student has agency or that student has growth mindset, you're basically going against Carol Dweck's theory that like
Yeah.
it's almost anti-growth mindset to believe that one person either has or doesn't have growth mindset,
Right,
right? To
because it
do that.
might
So
be situational, or in this case, they did try. In this case, they like
yeah,
for whatever barrier, whatever was in their mind at that time.
yeah. You
Yeah, no,
get a lot of perspective. And I think that's the thing you learn. And it's probably, oh, I know where I was going with the learning styles thing. Like, but I think that an educator, you can acknowledge that people are different. People have different styles for whatever reason to do that. And so again, you can't just assume that your one view of the system or your one view of the way it's going is that things. Even the justing, for example, I kind of think that if all you had were justers in the room, it would be bad. But if all you had were butters were in the room, that would
that
be really
that
bad
would be
too.
really bad. I
Right?
would not like that. I'm a doer. I'm a
Like
just
you
inner.
need yeah, and that's the I wonder if that third thing, the canners, is really what I'm thinking about. Where yeah, the justers oversimplify and the butters just get confused in it, but the can is like we can do this. So I think that's a
We need the
nice
can.
balance,
I
maybe.
like that a lot.
Yeah,
So
not
thinking
as
about
catchy,
it's catchy. Yeah, it's
but
super catchy. So thinking about like the canners and just thinking about like I don't know. Like I'm thinking, okay, so we have this system and then like things get dropped in that system and then cause chaos, whether it's like a new initiative and we're rolling it out to staff or like I don't know. I kind of was thinking about this ahead of time. Like school's been really hit up a lot lately and it's
mm,
become really visual what's going on because of social media and people talking and like we can kind of
mm,
see like what's going on in our communities and how people are like interpreting it. But like things like obviously, smartphones is a huge one right now, especially with like
mm.
more information on what it does, your social emotional learning and like our kids' frontal cortex developing because they're on their phones all the time and they're not talking to each other. And, all that. And then we have like the COVID and we realize like, oh, we were not ready for that. And we were not agile. We were
Mm,
not nimble. We did not know what to do. And, we had to figure it out the hard way essentially. And then, AI is as in your sector and in mine, like AI is just everywhere. I feel like everyone's
yeah.
talking about AI and I don't know. So all these things are happening. I guess in that case, like knowing what you know about product, like how do you prepare a system to take on these things? And you kind of touched upon
Yeah.
I would think the iterative kind of approach, but like whole cloth, like what are your thoughts on that?
Well, and yeah, it kind of goes to what we're saying, but we can extend on it more, where I think that, look, when things feel really uncertain, we gravitate, everyone does, gravitates to some certainty.
Mm.
What I've realized is that my version of certainty, I'm a sort of skeptical optimist, right? I just think it's all going to go to it's all going to go to shit basically, and yet we'll figure it out.
Oh,
So like I'm just like, oh, it's gonna it won't work the first through fifth time, but we're eventually gonna get there. It was really funny. That can really bother people sometimes because
oh
they're
yeah,
like, you're not being
what you're
optimistic.
saying right
I,
now is uncomfortable.
you know,
Yeah, yeah, like
yeah, I'm like, I'm pretty optimistic. I just think we're gonna go through the trough before we go through this thing. It's like shit will happen and then we'll just figure it out.
yeah.
Um, and so I think that we all have our own style for dealing with that level of uncertainty.
Mhm.
And yet the uncertainty is there. And so I think that the message that people need to take away is that, we all have our kind of way to defend against that. My way is to just kind of lean into it full force. But another person might be to do some justing, like we just need to make progress here, and other people need to get that going. But I think that ultimately the what I've come to in my head is that we're these collection of atoms, right?
Oh, I love this.
And we can think as much as we want to think about this stuff and let it get up in our head and get our things, but we really need to act our way forward and think our way forward, and think in an active way. There's a really, really good book called How Big Things Get Done. And it's written about mega projects. I would highly recommend any teacher read this book, because what they talk about is it's easy with software stuff to talk about like, oh, we'll just change it, we'll do things. But when you're talking about a curriculum, or you're talking about a school, or you're talking about, it's big.
Yeah.
So the work that I do is often very trivial in comparison. Like, it's not like you're going to end up with a kid not being educated. Like, it's like some corporate person won't be able to check a checkbox when they thought they needed to check the checkbox. I'm not in mission critical or safety critical work to do this stuff. But the author talks about these large mega projects, and it has this really interesting line, which is he says that one of the keys to big projects working is to think slow and act fast. And there's something really, really compelling about that idea, which is, because of how uncertain things are, if you spend a long time doing something to get to the point where you're going, the situation will change around you. So
Yeah.
we do need to be in a real bias to action at the moment, because if you wait a year to figure out how your school district will use AI will have changed and you won't really have learned anything
Right.
in that year to be able to do it. The thinking slow part is a fascinating area for me, because what the author Flyberg describes is, it's much more active than just kind of thinking in a wishy-washy way. He calls it Pixar planning, after Pixar, which does this sort of form of planning. But it's a very active, engaged prototyping kind of, and it's atoms. We're doing
We're
something with our
doing something.
hands.
We're gonna
We're
see what
moving.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing
Cause and
something,
effect.
and we're setting that forward. And it's just a fascinating way to think about it, where it is a form of planning, but it's much more active and learning based and simulation based about what's going to happen. It's much more fluid. We're considering different options that might happen. We're not just up in our head
Right.
about what's going on, or we're not making a big Gantt chart with, I think a lot in education and corporate environments, it's like, oh, we're going to get the committee together for 5 times. And by the time you do that, you have 5 months later, you've sort of just converged on the mean, and it's
So that
just this
happens in
blah
industry
plan.
too. That
Oh yeah,
happens
yeah. Oh,
that happens in
way
education
more,
all
because
the time.
yeah. And that's the point, is that's not a form of like thinking slow. It's not thought. It's very procedural
Yeah.
and kind of bureaucratic.
Just
You're
because
not
it
doing
takes
any
a long
activities.
time doesn't mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So a really good, very good example of the thinking slow is to do, for example, like a pre-mortem activity where you engage the team in like thinking backwards from some outcome, and role playing and strategizing about how you got there is a great example of doing
I
it.
love that.
And that, so you could,
Yeah, that right. Hold
yeah,
on
go
real quick.
ahead.
So thinking for schools, thinking about, okay, let's say you did AI and kids are using it, teachers are using it.
Yeah.
The worst thing that could happen, right? Like
Yeah. And
that's
not
a
just
really
thinking like, and there's a big difference between saying, okay, we've now opened up the committee to put risks in a document, and everyone is
right.
like, I'm going to put my risks, and you're going to get risks, and you'll get the risks that you see them, but you're not going to engage people's imagination and planning and scenario building around that. And to actually put a finer point on that, when you do the sort of make a list of risks thing,
Yeah,
what are
yeah.
you going to do? You're going to generate a huge list of risks. And you're not going to role play. Is that really a risk? Like, what's the worst that would happen? Like, we would be able to dampen that if we saw that. Like,
Right.
and I think a lot of this has, that some schools has to make a rule for something like, this year we will allow X in X or X in Y, or there will be no, we will not access ChatGPT from any classroom for a whole year. That's a very, what would be called like robust rule, but it's not a very resilient or anti-fragile rule. Like, it's easy to understand. It's justing. We are just not
Right.
going to let people do these
Right.
things, but there's no opportunity for anything potentially new to
Yeah.
emerge as they were doing these things. So for example, at my kids' class, what my plan is, what I volunteered for, is I'm going to create a physical language model
Okay.
for them to see how AI works.
Oh, cool.
Because my theory is that and I'm going to do it with a marble. And so
Yep.
you sort of run the marble down the sentence, and it's going to make a sentence. And then I'm going to want them to like record the sentence, which gives you a sense of the branching logic for AI, how it works. And because my theory is that like, if we can, one major risk, and I saw it with my 6-year-old, is he started to talking to Chat GPT, and like I come back 30 minutes later, I was listening, but it was interesting he's talking about rainbow friends and
Oh,
the Chat GPT voice is just like, yes, you will be able to go to the haunted house if you want to. And it's got really scary. I was observing that, but realized there is a major risk that we're going to anthropomorphize these voices and believe they exist.
yeah.
Like believe that we don't understand that it's like math, or an autocomplete system, right? So that was my theory of something more resilient. And then we could see, like, I do that activity in the team, and maybe we try some kind of simulation, and then we could observe it. And if it starts going wrong and it's not really doing anything, we could just dampen. Like, that's a safe to fail experiment.
Yeah.
No one's going to get, and I think probably teachers, if they're honest, probably do a ton of safe to fail experiments
Absolutely.
without telling anyone else.
Oh, sure. There's no
And they
curriculum,
just are
please.
like, if it
Yep.
works, I'm going to go and tell everyone
Yeah.
else in my
If
team.
it
But if it
doesn't work, I
doesn't,
tell no one.
um, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is interesting, but that was the first thought that came to mind.
I love that. Actually, I'm just thinking like, can you like record this little mini lesson? Because I'm just thinking like early
Oh,
education.
it'll be fun to watch them.
Yeah, I think that's super cool. And we need to be thinking like
Oh,
that, like how can we incorporate it in a meaningful way? How do we build that scaffolding to better understanding as
yeah,
we go down this path? Because I don't think we can like not go down it. I think we can't just
yeah.
ignore it, right? Like we have to respond and test and see. I think that's really important. No, I love that. So yeah, if you want to share your lesson plan, the teachers will
Yeah, I'll try to do that.
definitely interested.
Well, but I think that that's an interesting one too, where we were risks. And what I was describing is, when without engaging your hands
Mhm.
and your voice and your ears, and in the doing, in the doing of the thing, you're just going to create a list of risks. They're all created equal. You'll probably talk yourself out of something, oh my God, there's lots of risks in doing it.
Right.
But for example, just scenario playing, with someone. Like you could just start with a team and just say, let's just paint this scenario here. We've walked into a classroom and someone is like, they're doing their homework with ChatGPT and simply copying it back and forth. And then you say to the teachers, like, are there any like slight modifications you could do with that? And I'm sure the teachers would be like, yeah, totally. There's obviously modifications we could do it. Like all we need to do is ask them to take that and do this and then do that.
Yeah.
And it's going to up level what they're doing 1,000%. So I think that that's like a form of active thinking that we often don't engage our own brains. And so I think that's an important point there.
I think that like that just make from a curriculum designer, like thinking about like and I should say a professional developer of teachers, like painting out those
Yeah.
examples or case studies or like showing like here's how it could have gone and here's with
Yeah.
those few tweaks we can level up, right? We can level up the learning and and still use these
Yeah.
tools to do that. And so no, that's really important. No, I love that so much. Um, on the other, so I have a few questions kind of outlined just because I
Oh, yeah.
know
Yeah.
your time. Like, thank you for giving me your time.
No,
This
no
is really
problem.
fun. I love how you like look at things and think about things. So I think that's really cool. We should do more of these, like Ed Talks.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so thinking about I guess this is more of like, so I also work with like CTE type teachers or secondary, high school level teachers thinking about preparing kids for school, like, life beyond the classroom. And so my big thing is like, how do we develop these 21st century skills and like what kind of scenarios and learning, we can like take them through. I guess like knowing what you know and just knowing how big that industry is. What are the this is a big question. So like let your mind like just be
Yeah.
creative, say whatever you want. There's no rules. No. I guess what kinds of things should teachers be really considering in their classes? Because I will be honest, I've been in and out of classrooms in Iowa, outside of Iowa, and
Yeah.
at times it really is traditional, right? Like we have the rows of desks and we have the read page X to Z, and then here's the questions for you to reflect on. And then, it moves forward. And that's easy to manage and, easy to distribute. But like, I don't think that's going to pay the bill at the end of the day if that's
Yeah.
all we do. So
Mm.
I guess I'm just curious on your thoughts, like, if we could really modernize our approaches and blend what from industry
Yeah.
into the classroom, like what would a high school classroom, what should these kids be doing if we were really truly gonna
I think teachers know. I don't think there's much corporate environment.
yeah,
I would. It's funny because I think that what do we know? It's an interesting question
I know.
because I think that there's folks. It's interesting because let's say that in the corporate space, we often find ourselves, looking at things like the military or sports or the corporate settings are very interesting in that there's a lot of often very competing needs in these environments. Changing behaviors can be very difficult. There are sort of adult learners, and adult learners have their own sort of agendas working out in these things. And so I think that one thing that's kind of fascinating about your question is I think that the corporate world is still grappling with what it means to learn on the job. I mean, if you go to the military or if you go to other like safety critical environments like nursing or other things, you see vast amounts of research for, for example, I have a friend who's a UX researcher and she worked in the Air Force. She had a whole group that was like, how do we get the behaviors of teach people, adopt these behaviors of leadership, like understand. And so what's kind of funny is in the corporate world doesn't ever get that deep for the most part, because it's very political. It's very transient in that sense. So you see these things from the military, you see these things from safety critical stuff, and you think, oh, geez, I wish we could adopt that same
Yeah.
level of care and concern, which is one thing is I think that the corporate world could learn a lot from how people are thinking about modern education. However, there's always this weird barrier of it's political. There's lots of cultures within any company culture. there's adult learners, there's people who are just saying, look, job market's not great. I'm going to lay low, not worth really. I'm going to learn. There's a lot of learning outside of your job in the
Yeah.
corporate environment. People are like, I'm not learning a lot from my boss. So I'm going to go and I'm going to take a course. I'm going to do something like that. So the first thing that comes to mind is like, yeah, we're looking for inspiration in the corporate
Right.
world to figure out how to do these things. The thing that comes to mind, but one thing that the corporate world probably does, it can be pretty relaxed in terms of like adopting and experimenting with new tools. I mean, like we're spinning up digital whiteboards. We're on these, like, we spend a lot of money to collaborate and a lot of money to observe what's going on. So I know this sounds like a really lame way to answer the question, but like,
Oh,
spending money to collaborate,
so we need to
that you
spend
have
more
to
money on our
invest.
schools. Hey, can I get an
Yeah.
amen?
Well, as simple as that sounds,
No,
like
yeah, it's true.
just having the supplies and having the equipment and being able to, for example, in my environment, if I need to start doing a digital whiteboard with someone in 2 seconds, boom, 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 I set it up, we get it going. If I need to record the call, that's great. If I need to use AI to summarize a call, I can use AI to summarize a call,
Right.
because we can spend on doing those things. I think that the other thing that you learn at least in the environment that I'm in, is the cross-functional, cross-disciplinary ideas to doing it. So we're forced to work in, and if you imagine academia, it's a big deal when someone from like the physics
Oh,
department
yes.
goes over to the sociology department. Even though I've read, they talk about it all the time. They say, what would be possible if we collaborated across the different parts of our university?
Yep.
There's no immediate forcing function to make that happen. So in industry, although it's not scientific, it's not like following the scientific process, or we're forced to work together a lot. And I think that that's something that probably at a high level is going to be really necessary in work environments. And it's mashing together engineering. So, you'll be in an environment and someone is talking about behavioral science and someone's talking about engineering, and then you've got a UX designer talking about something else. And it's a lot of stuff mixed together. So that's one other thing. I mean, I think maybe those environments could learn from that. But even then, I think probably schools and educators know that. It's
Oh,
just, how
sure.
do they clear the decks to make it happen?
Make it happen.
um,
Well, right. To be
yeah,
intentional about design. So I'm hearing design, right? Like design of the
yeah,
space,
yeah,
invest in the space. Like if you want kids to collaborate,
yeah,
well, you probably need to have a collaborative space because, sitting in desks
yeah,
far apart might not lend itself to that. If you want kids to really
yeah,
share and be visual and like try to get to the same kind of understanding, then whiteboards would be great to have so that they can, brainstorm out loud
yeah,
essentially. And then so like the physical design needs to be intentional. And yes, please, can we spend more money? Can you give us more money? No.
yeah,
And then on the other side, I heard you say that I really love what you're saying about forcing functions. I don't think we think of it, or well, I shouldn't say that, right?
mm,
That's my own perception of the world. Like I think that we need to be thinking more about those forcing functions and being intentional in our design, whether it's like the bell schedule or like having those collaborative, like why couldn't the industrial tech work with the business class and create
yeah,
something awesome, or collaborate on a project together. But how do you structurally like the forcing function to make that happen? Like what's the thing to
yeah,
besides just a teacher going, this is a good idea, and the other teacher going, yes, let's do that, because that to
yeah.
me,
That's so funny.
that happens, right? Like we have these pockets of innovation, and I almost think it's weird because like when people leave, the people that are doing that, it goes away because there was no forcing function. It was totally like internal
Oh, I
motivation.
love
I
that. Yeah,
want to do that. So like if leaders are listening, I'm just thinking they need to be challenging themselves to think about those forcing functions like within their systems.
yeah. And I think people know about. It's funny about, you mentioned sort of the design of the classroom, and I think that teachers. I mean, even where we are in Santa Barbara, we were touring around schools. Santa Barbara, there's lots of money in Santa Barbara. The public schools, I mean, there's public school with like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, they've got like this robotics squad. They've got this sailing crew. They've got
Love it.
I was just like, well, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of money going into that. There
Right.
must be, you can't just have some like robot squad going to Portugal if there's not lots of money, right? And people say, oh, that's the science school. Maybe because it's like near Boeing and a university. So that's probably the two things you need to get.
To get
Well,
that
probably
kind
not
of
Boeing. It's
situation.
not, it's near Raytheon, not Boeing.
Never.
If it was Boeing, they wouldn't be learning a lot of them. But what's really, really interesting about that is that we're going to we wander in, and yet, all the chairs, everything are very structured. And you talk to the teacher and they're like, wow, there's just this inertia in those environments through the cycle of sort of regulations and how the classrooms are um, uh, funded and the materials that they have and the things. And being in a Montessori environment has been very, very interesting, just because you see that, like, when you relax the rules and you have a culture, and I think that's the important part, like almost to the extreme, Montessori teachers, like, I get it and everything, but they're just like, oh, they're not touching it, or, I found out yesterday that every single kid in my school's kids class is on their own complete learning track. They've got their own little books. They track their own progress. And there's 3 grades of kids there at the same time. And they're like, well, you just got to go. And some teacher was like, how do I know? It was funny. Some teachers like, how do I know if my child, I know what happened. They missed 3 days of school. It's like, how do I have to how does they catch up? And I think the teacher almost was like laughing on the inside. Like, look, that just doesn't,
Happen.
just by the sheer, like,
Yeah.
the nature of how they do. She opens up the book of the kids, and she's like, one kid over 3 years had been drawing a little line up in their little book of all these like math lessons. And then she compared it to another one, which was a lot slower and moved up
Yeah.
like this, and another one that do these things.
I
So I
love
think that
that.
there's something to that. There's something to that where I feel for, um, I think there's what's very interesting. This happens in industry and stuff too, is we've got to, it's easy going back to the Justin Butts. It's very easy to say, like, well, they just need to relax the rules and teach and just give them more money, and teachers have to be able to build their
Right.
environments the way
Right.
they
Right.
want. There's a little bit about, we have to give credit to the people working in the here and now on the big things to make these more system level shifts in how schools are set up. And it happens in the course of years, decades, not months. And I think that's the hardest thing for all of us individually to think about, where
Because you just
we're
want
in the
to jump
here
in
and
and do
now, and
it
we've
and
got,
like, yeah.
you want to do that thing. And so I think that this is also a thing for schools. That's what was interesting about this book, How Big Things Get Done, where it's easy to point at startups or whatever and say, even in the industry world, people point at startups and they say, oh, they've got it all figured out. We just need to copy what they're doing. And it's like, no, there's limitations to that. That's like saying that you're on a pirate, you're in a steam tanker, and then you point at a pirate ship and say, we just need to be like a pirate ship and just do that thing. So I think that one of the most interesting thing in any environment, and probably in education, they need to think about is, how do we make sustained change efforts at a system level? There's a whole thing now called, it was at Carnegie Mellon, and now there's other programs cropping up called transition design, or designing futures, or there's this whole area of design, which I don't know a lot about,
Yeah. Sounds
but
interesting.
they're asking these really, really core questions about, like, transition design is one of those where, how will we shift attitudes to prepare for global warming, or how can we actually design our way into those things from a behavior level, from a community level, from a cultural level, to do these things. And I think that that's where it gets really, really heavy.
Yeah.
That's where
A lot of
the
work.
principal who's saying we've got like a decade-long plan to modernize, and probably everyone's eye rolling. How could you do something that's supposed to take a decade, but that where we could see progress
Right.
and see and experiment and do the thinking
And
big?
feel wind and like feel the
The
wind, right? Like we want
Yeah, feel the wind. That's exactly right. Like, what would it be like? And I think that our natural tendency is, oh, we're going to use the charter school program to do that. Oh, we'll experiment with the charter school to be able to do it. But even here in Santa Barbara, for example, the charter school starts to develop its own culture
Right.
which
It's
is not
different.
the same as the other culture.
Yeah.
And so then you have to think to yourself, like, how I love your thing of the tailwinds. Like,
Yeah.
what might we do in designing this sort of it's not even design in the traditional sense. It's almost like a nudging. Like, how will we create this nudging over the course of many years or a decade?
Right.
And teachers do often stay in certain schools for a decade or more. Like,
Yeah.
how might you create that type of change so that by year 5 there's a tangible progress? And I think that's where it gets very, very interesting, and where systems thinking and complexity thinking and all this stuff is very, very important,
Yeah.
because you're out of the realm of the justing, and you're in the realm of the canning and the budding, but you it's how do you sustain long things where it could take multiple years
I like the
of
active
learning.
plan. I'm imagining the active planning going on in that to keep it
Yeah,
front of mind. So people, it's still like in their purview of like, we're working towards this, whether it's like incrementally or we're just going to experiment maybe and like see how
yeah,
these parts of what we're thinking, to that, I don't, for lack of a better term, like that future ready, very modern, like we're successful in, helping kids
yeah,
transition to life beyond school, or we are hitting our academic benchmarks, or we're we're
yeah.
developing skill, like all the things that schools are trying to do. um do you think that we are in a way bogged down? Like as I list those out, I'm just thinking, man, like as a human being, and I'm responsible in this 40 minutes for XYZ. I think that's a lot of the, when I talk to teachers, the thing that comes to mind is like, well, that's just one more thing. And like, we can't, we have so much on our plates now.
Mm,
So like, and in my, like, I'm a canner, so I'm like, well, that's okay. That,
yeah,
take that thing that's not important, like take that off your plate and put this on. Like, how do you I guess approach that if it feels like, well, there's just too much to focus on? Or is it okay to
yeah,
be like, you know what? There is, like you said, kind of like blur it all out a little bit. Let's focus on let's be like really dedicated to this idea of collaboration, and maybe everything else will kind of fall in line with that. And then
mm,
work to grow our space to be more collaborative, and work to put kids in situations where they are truly collaborating because they need to and they want to and they're motivated to.
yeah.
So
I think what I'm getting from what you're saying is a little bit of that. It's the overwhelming complexity side where it can just feel um, just mind numbing,
yeah.
and kind of going. I don't really have another answer than that. I think it is a bit of a balance. It's a polarity of sorts, right? Where it's not like a trade-off, like you can only have one or the other, but we're always kind of swimming between those particular things. So, like, very actionably, what a school or what we do in our environments is we might sort of take a time box. Sometimes we'll think in terms of 6 weeks or whatever, but let's say you have a new type of program when your company in your school where you're trying to, it seems intractable and you're just trying to get that kind of hands-on feeling. You might kind of create a like 6 week block, and you might say, well, we're gonna try to do like a 2 or 3 day offsite or in the afternoon with some teachers at the end on the 6th week, where we're gonna go and really, like, you can't come to work every day drowning in that level of complexity, but you might want to dedicate those 3 days to kind of like planning the next 6 week block for how you're doing it. And so I think that there's no silver bullet to it, in the sense that you just have to balance those modes.
Yeah.
There is something in design thinking, it's called the double diamond, but it's useful, but then not useful depending on how you think about it. But the whole idea is that there's divergence and convergence, and it describes things as a diamond. We diverge, we converge, we diverge, we converge. And in the double diamond, they have we diverge and converge on the problem, and then we diverge and converge on the solution. And I think sometimes there might be 3 diamonds, like we diverge and converge on the opportunity, then we diverge and converge on the problem, then on the solution. And there's probably diamonds within those diamonds, because
Oh,
that's just the way
sure.
I'm going to think about it.
I know, I'm like
But
imagining this out right now.
I
You're
have I
the
have a
beautiful
funny
mess.
drawing where I'm just like, I make it very like there's a million diamonds. I was called the million diamond model. But I think that there is something to that, that when we're diverging, it's a certain type of stress.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, you can be very open-ended and it's exciting. We're diverging, but then it starts to gnaw on you. You're like, oh, we haven't come back home for a little bit. Like we're out in the woods too much. There's too much fog. And you find yourself like that point where you start to go from diverging to converging is usually very tangible. Someone will say, hey, we got to move forward here. Now, ideally that doesn't happen too early. You sit in that moment, in that biggest, when you've really diverged, you're at the furthest point. You've got so many different ideas. Ideally, you just push in just another week of that, right?
Yeah.
You sit in that discomfort for a little bit. And then we do turn the corner, and then you've got this level of convert where you change modes, right? So the points where we shift from convergence to divergence or back are always hard, but we have to keep moving that. So that's what comes to mind with that question of you can't stay in one of those states too long. You can't stay in an early divergence mode too long. It'll burn you out. And at the same time, we all are working on something where like we're highly aligned, but we got to disrupt this right now.
Right.
And then it's time to change. So hopefully that helps.
I love that. I think it gives, to me, it almost like gives, not that teachers need the permission, but sometimes we do, we need to hear it. Like it's okay to, it's almost like taking that risk, like walking out to the woods for a little bit, kind of
Yeah.
feeling it out. Maybe we have some really good successes and we're like, you know what, we're going to come back to these woods.
Yeah.
Or maybe we're going to go further down the road. But
And it's
then
best to
knowing,
do it with other people. And I think
oh,
this is the one
true.
thing you talk about,
So
the
true.
environment part,
Yeah.
which is if you're not creating a community of people who are taking that journey with you,
Right.
it's very, very lonely. And I imagine that, for example, it's funny, depending, I think, on the teacher you talked to during the pandemic, it was either the highlight of community, because it was finally like the teachers were all in truly the same boat
Right. Yep.
and they needed a community. Now,
Yep.
what's happened, it's funny, I've noticed it's almost a reverse pendulum that as people in some parts of the world, at least, or countries have sort of gone back to normal, they've gotten into the other parts of their life. It's like they've drifted away from that professional community that they were in each other's face for
Yep.
those numbers of years. But you just can't discount the power of like you are being taught by each other
Yeah.
and by other people. You're in a cohort class. It just happens to be that you're teaching
Yeah.
other people at the same time. So like
I
so
love that.
you have to kind of care for yourself as part of that. That's your cohort of other students.
Hmm.
And you just happen to be teaching other students at the same time.
I love that. That is, I don't know. See, that to me is like indicative of the beautiful mess. Like on the education front, right? Like I think in my mind, I'm imagining like that is so true. And it's so much easier to take risks when you have those other learners, other teachers with you
Yeah.
in that messy phase and like just going through it together. I love that. Um,
Yeah, and I think that I mean one finer point with that too is that's also where the personal differences come out that you just need to iron out with your fellow cohort of people. Like if you create a cohort of teachers, like there's probably some people they're busy, they might have like 3-4 kids themselves that they're busy
right.
and they don't have necessarily the same. I think it's funny, someone was saying that last night and it feels almost like a stereotype, but they were pointing out, they're like, oh, that new teacher seems to be doing all the crazy stuff. Well, it turns out that the new teacher has no kids, just arrived in town, has plenty of time, has no other commitments, and
Yep.
then a teacher who's been there for a while has like 3 kids in the school, has a really busy life and doing those. And I think that's where you have to form that common bond of why you're there together, because it's easy to say form a community, but it can become fractured. And that's an important point as you do it.
Yeah, I like that. And I also like that you pointed out just like people are at different places in their lives. And so
Yeah.
priorities shift and like balance and like what you have time for. And that's absolutely I'm like seeing myself as when I first became a science teacher. I was definitely what you like I was doing everything, but I didn't have kids. Oh, you need
Yeah.
someone to go do that. I can do it. I'll do it. Like over
That's so funny. Yeah.
like I'm not a try hard. I just have time. No.
Oh,
Um
that's funny.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's
Yeah.
good. This has been really delightful, and I feel like you've hit so many, um, really in ways actionable, things we could be doing or thinking about. And I don't know. I'm excited for the future of education. I think there's a lot to come, and it's just going to be I'm curious to see how it all evolves. And but like you said, it's going to be this convergence diver. It really is. Like I
Yeah,
think we're trying new things. I was just reading about and I have some friends that work for like a micro school, and I'm like, tell me more. What's a micro school? Like,
yeah,
what are you doing? And so it's like we're seeing these little things kind of like pop up, and we're trying new things. We're being bold, and I think that's what I was hoping would happen in this
yeah,
conversation is, like if we're gonna hack the class, like what are
yeah,
some ways we can look at this? And so I really
yeah.
appreciate
Yeah,
your
just don't underestimate. I think anytime I meet anyone in education is you got to take care of yourself too. I mean, it is that it's the same thing, for example, in a good analogy is that I know a lot of people who work in the sort of digital side of the US government or state government or things. And these are very passionate people. They've showed up to kind of serve their country, work in government, apply what they know in these sort of skills of design and product management and engineering, and yet they are kind of up against these sort of sort of naturally, in some sense, bureaucratic institutions to do these things. And I have to remind them too that, like, Rome wasn't built in a day. Obviously, these things can take years in those environments, and I think that's an important you don't want to burn out doing it, and that's an important point too. So
thank you. I think teachers are gonna thank you for saying that, and they're gonna go, can I get an amen? Because it's
yeah,
true. And balance is important. I think most teachers, I mean, granted, we've had a lot of turnover. I don't remember the statistic now. It's
yeah,
pretty high.
like
Like what isn't it like 1 in 5, 1 in 4? I don't know, something like that leave after 3 years or something. And that's why we're having all these like teacher shortage problems. But I think just knowing like, hey, change is hard and it
yeah.
might take time, and that's okay. I know I think leaders understand that too, hopefully, and that, they're not um, bogging down educators, but
Yeah.
I like the idea of the slow to go fast, slow and fast. What did you say? Slow thinking, but fast at doing,
Yeah, fast acting. Yeah,
fast
that's
acting.
that's the that's a an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Um, Great. Yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah, doing this, and yeah,
Thank
people
you.
reach out. I maybe LinkedIn or connect somehow.
Yeah,
And
how
that's
good. So, okay. So, yeah. So, I will definitely be sharing out your Substack just so if
yeah,
people want to
that's
check
the
it out.
best way at the moment, and it
Okay.
might relate. We can pick out some uh specific posts that might be like a good starting uh zone for what
Like,
we're doing. Yeah.
don't be overwhelmed because it is
Yeah, don't be
for
overwhelmed. This is
product
like
people.
this is like a path, yeah, to get
Yeah,
through all
yeah,
these
yeah.
posts.
Well, and I was lucky that I found the 54 sources
Yeah,
of dissonance, because I think like as I was reading, like that's really applicable. And like I had this agile kind of background, so I
yeah.
wasn't totally confused or overwhelmed. But I will say there are some that I've read of yours that I'm like, whoa, I know nothing about this.
This is a whole other world. This is
There's a
crazy.
whole other world out there, and I have questions. And no, I don't know what it is, but I find this stuff fascinating. I didn't know really until grad school what a systems thinker I was and how I like to think about it too. And so I'm gonna throw this out there, but like if you ever like have extra time and want to think about like building one of your beautiful visuals like for education,
Oh
um,
yeah, yeah, we can
I
do one.
think
That would be fun. Or even just a class to teach how to do that. I think that it's
yeah,
yeah, that's it's a pretty natural thing once you get the hang of it. And some of these just basic loops of things at least give a good starting point to start to
yeah.
even if it's just a bit of a catharsis for people
Sure,
to
like a
realize
release of
those.
like this is what I
Yeah,
but I think too like we're getting so we're being more visual, and we're having better ways to articulate like what we're trying to say, and
yeah,
I think that's crucial. And so seeing your tools have really like empowered me to have these conversations, kind of like guardrails. Like I think
yeah,
people need guardrails
yeah,
facilitate that conversation, whether you're trying to change or improve. It can
yeah.
be, it could be hard to do sometimes. So really appreciate your stuff. Thank you for being here, and I
Yeah,
hope you
thank you so
have a great
much.
rest of have a great weekend.
Yeah, there we go. All right,
Thank you,
talk to you
John.
soon. Thank you so much, Laura. Bye.